Join us for an interview with TJ Jones, founding consultant of Full Picture Management, a business whose mission is to guide organizations in putting workers, customers, and service users that belong to the LGBTQ+ community on an equal footing. This is one of the most powerful interviews we've conducted. We hope it moves you too.
Psychologically, I'm running on fumes. I'm in a really pretty dark place. I've had some things happen, some relationships have fallen apart, lost my job. But every week I went to this meeting and I said, okay, the queers need a parade. And that was like my mission. And in working with the Pride organization, I ended up discovering a love and absolute adoration for being in front of a room, asking people to challenge their own biases about queer and trans people.
So let's get into this. According to separate studies, almost 10 million North American workers identify as part of the LGBTQ+ community. But despite significant progress in many countries in our social views towards this community since the new millennium, concerns remain as hate crimes targeting this group has been ticking upwards in recent years. But open hostility isn't simply limited to public spaces, but are happening in companies as well. In one of the first studies to look at LGBTQ+ employment discrimination, it was found that in the United States, more than 45% of LGBTQ+ workers reported experiencing unfair treatment at some point in their lives, including being harassed or fired because of their sexual orientation or gender identity, with nearly a third of respondents reporting having experienced it in the last 5 years alone. No surprise then that research indicates that 50% of LGBTQ+ employees aren't out to their current supervisor, while 26% aren't out to any of their coworkers. Instead, they're forced to conceal their true selves in the hope of being accepted for somebody they aren't. And this brings us to this week's guest. TJ Jones is a member of the transgender community and founder of Full Picture Management. TJ knows exactly what it's like to live this life. After a childhood of ostracization and minimal support, where in high school, he was once told by school leaders, "We can expel you or the rest of your peers," and was then forced to leave, he went on to an early adulthood struggling with substance abuse and attempted suicide. But his stubbornness and innate right to existence became the life force for the creation of Full Picture Management, where he dedicates himself to helping organizations develop inclusive cultures to help employees, customers, and service users be their true selves without the need to sacrifice. In this interview, TJ will talk about the distressing experience of growing up and discovering his true identity, and why he wouldn't change anything as it led him towards a business that's allowing him to open eyes, change opinions, and help businesses be better versions of themselves. Now let's meet TJ. I am unbelievably excited to welcome today's entrepreneur, who comes to us from the incredible island of Newfoundland on the east coast of Canada. And I'd like to welcome TJ Jones, who is a young entrepreneur with a consultancy called Full Picture Management. And I just want to say thank you so much for making the time, TJ. Super excited to hear your story.
Thank you for having me join you.
So TJ, what does Full Picture Management do?
Full Picture Management is a little business that I operate out of my apartment. This is my home office, as you can see behind me. The goal and focus of this business is to help organizations, folks within the business industry, to develop more inclusive practices for their 2S LGBTQIA+ workers and customers. So it's a bit of a mouthful just to say, let's put 2S LGBTQIA+ inclusion on the map in the business industry.
Right. Now, I'm curious, why is this important, do you think?
Well, that's a big question. I think we're in a very important sort of social and cultural moment right now where we're looking at EDI principles and how to incorporate more inclusive practices within business, within organizations, within nonprofit sector, just pretty much across sort of, runs the gamut of different ways that people sort of organize themselves, put themselves together. We're looking at ways to be more meaningful and impactful in how we create those spaces so that everybody can be their authentic selves. They can bring everything that they have to offer. But personally, I think, within the context of 2S LGBTQI+ inclusion, it's important because, partly it's important to me because it's my life. It's my lived experience. As a trans person and as a queer person, I've had my own experiences with what it is to try and find gainful employment and to try and feel represented and included in the various spaces that I sort of navigate as I move through the world. And I feel that, having this conversation, challenging the business industry to step up its game a little bit, we're in a good moment for it.
Now, it's funny because I often say that, the typical scenario is that a baker starts a bakery and a plumber starts a plumbing supply store. So in many cases, people that start businesses, work in the area that they start the business in, or have a history of working in the area they start the business in. And what's fascinating to me about your business is that it goes much, much deeper for you, in terms of your experience of what you speak. I'm curious if you'd be kind enough to share your personal story, going back to the beginning, and what experiences you went through that concluded that this was something you needed to commit your life to.
For sure. I'm pretty much an open book. And I think there's a lot of times, particularly in, the context of the work that I do a lot of sort of professional development training, and there's definitely value in sort of humanizing the experience. And I do appreciate the opportunity to share what these kinds of experiences can look like. Very much though, only, I want to acknowledge with the caveat that I can only speak from my own experience. I can't speak for sort of the entirety of the queer and trans communities that exist out there. But from my personal perspective and things that I've encountered, there's definitely sort of some folks are really sort of taken aback by things that they can't personally relate to. And there's challenges in sort of understanding the experience of people when it's outside your own realm of, your own personal experience and your own personal knowledge. But my story sort of started, I guess, when I was probably around 13 or 14, and I started figuring out that the interests and sort of the pull that I was having and how I interacted with people was a bit different. Back then, I thought I was bisexual. So, I was assigned female at birth. I'm navigating junior high and high school, trying to figure out these things. And this was about, 98, 99 when I was figuring these sorts of things out. So the conversation wasn't really that open at the time, at least in the school that I was in. And I found that there were definitely some challenges with that. And so people were really taken aback by it. Didn't really know how to interact with me. Some of the friends that I had at the time were challenged by me, sharing these parts of myself, and really didn't know what to do with it and how to sort of respond to it. It kind of indicated to me that maybe it wasn't something I should be that open about. So I sort of internalized it a little bit. Fast forward a couple of years to high school, and I'm having, again, these sorts of feelings and thoughts and conversations and trying to figure out what it all means for me. So we're looking at, 2002. Yeah, so my coming out process in high school was an interesting sort of experience that involved a friend of mine and I just kind of coming together. And, we had some kisses in a park, and it was recorded in a way that wasn't very consensual. Let's put it that way. But it became well known within my high school, and people, rumors started and people started talking about it. And me actually being physically at school became untenable. It was unsafe. I experienced some violence at the hands of folks that didn't quite understand it, that, were threatened by it in their environment. School became a very challenging place for me to stay. And it ended up actually really influencing and affecting my education. I had to drop out for my own safety. And I'm not trying to make light of it. I've done some therapy and done some work around working through all of it. But it was a very difficult time, and I ended up having to leave. I had my education taken away from me. My right to an education was taken away from me based on people's response to that. So
now, but do you mind if I ask about that period?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
You're 16, 17 years old, and you're encountering this. First of all, what was your family's situation? Like, how open was your family to some of what your reality was at that time?
Well, that was a bit challenging. One of the things that I will say particularly for my parents, my mom and my stepdad at the time, they were very. My mom led me to believe that I could be and do whatever it was I was and needed to do. Like there was no fear of sharing that part of myself. I hadn't really experienced the nervousness of the very real situation and circumstances that happen for a lot of folks when they come out to their families. I wasn't nervous about being disowned. I wasn't nervous about being kicked out. But that being said, when I did go back to her and I say, okay, well, these things are happening in my life and this is a part of who I am, there was a bit of a dismissive sort of quality to it. She kind of chalked it up to being a phase. And I don't think that's an uncommon experience. A lot of folks really challenge, young people's autonomy and their ability to define themselves and to really put these parts of themselves out there. So that did influence sort of my relationship with her going forward, shall we say, because, it didn't feel like she was engaging authentically with me. She had her idea about who I was, and, TJ doesn't really know himself. Granted, I was going, by a different name and using different pronouns at the time. But that definitely sort of influenced the authenticity in our relationship and our ability to connect, because she sort of disbelieved that this was a part of who I was, and she wanted to sort of wait to see how it played out.
And was your father on the scene?
My biological father? No, actually not so much. I haven't been connected with him in a number of years, actually. So,
right. So you grew up with. So this was really an issue between your mom and yourself in the family in the family home.
Yeah, my brother's always been, like, as we say in Newfoundland and Labrador, best kind. He's always been a great supporter, very, very vocal in that support, and, really
Fantastic.
Was on side. So,
and so in the school context, how supportive was the administration of your situation? Or if you had to leave, they probably weren't very supportive, but what was their reaction to your situation and the way that they tried to either support or not support you?
It's a good question. I think, again, sort of contextualizing this, it's 2002. Conversation isn't as prevalent as it is now. Human rights and its inclusion within human rights. I mean, gay marriage wasn't even a thing for a couple of years after this. So just kind of, contextualizing it a little bit. There was one particular teacher that I had. She was ironically my psychology, sociology, and anthropology teacher. She was the one doing that course, which makes sense given her context and her intelligence and her approach to it. She was a fantastic support. I think, and I don't want to, sort of project this onto her, but I think she was also a member of the community as well. So she was picking up on some of the cues. She was very in tune to me. She could see that things were happening. And I remember that she very gently tried to check in with me. So as these things are sort of happening in school, in the environment of the school, people are whispering about me. I'm not really going to many classes. Her class was the only one I was actually attending because I was very interested in psychology, sociology, and anthropology at the time. And, it was sort of a bit of a night and day switch, because I was very, I was performing very well in school academically until all of these things sort of started to happen. I'm quite an intelligent human, and I've, found it again in the last few years in this business and having gone back to college. But Miss John, and I got to give a shout out to Miss John. She saw me. She very much saw me in a way that I needed at that time, because there was nothing else in my life that was validating my experience quite like her in how she actually saw who I was and what I was going through. So she'd check in with me occasionally. And then there was this one sort of day where everything came to a head, and I had a bit of a break. I had a bit of a moment where I was very overwhelmed by everything, and I knew that I could go to her, and she brought me to sort of, the principal's office, if you will, to the administration, and advocated for me and me talking about what it was that I was experiencing at school at the hands of other students. And unfortunately, that conversation ended up with the administration looking at me and saying, it's actually less complicated for us to expel you than it would be for us to actually deal with everything that you're dealing with at school.
You are kidding.
No. So it's, I can say this with a smile now. Again, lots of work and humility, I think, in my path and my work that I've done for myself, and the support that I've found in my communities. But it was a very, very challenging time. I mean, I'm 17 years old and I'm navigating these things at school, and then I'm losing access to my education. And then I have the folks that are in that arena or in that sort of institution that are supposed to protect me and provide my safe access to my education are saying, you're the problem and we need to kind of remove you. It's easier to deal with you and remove you from the situation than it is to actually create a safe space for you to, pursue your education.
I
It was
can only
difficult.
imagine, I'm the father of three girls, and one of them is almost 17. And I can imagine that to feel that sense of isolation. I mean, today kids are growing up and they're being taught that everyone needs to be treated equally, regardless of their backgrounds. So hearing your story, that sense of isolation, I can't even imagine my child feeling that sense of isolation. I mean, it's heartbreaking. So I guess this is why so many people from your community end up taking their own lives when they're young, because they feel out. I mean, how did you how were you able to deal with that situation? Like what was where was the inner reserve of strength, or where did you turn to be able to manage that? You're not getting the support at home. You're not believed. You've just been basically told, sorry, we got to pick a side. We're not picking yours. So out you go. How did you deal with that?
Well, I think it's interesting perspective, really, to kind of look at it. It's your story, and it's part of what made you who you are today, and it's kind of like a culmination, and you don't really see it as in piecemeal sometimes when you're reflecting on things. But to be honest, I'm not really sure. I mean, to be blunt, I made a lot of probably not the healthiest decisions. In my teen years, after all of that sort of happened at school, I actually ended up admitting myself into like a program actually at the local hospital for youth in terms of like for my psychological and psychiatric health. I sought out some counseling. I ended up in that program for about 3 weeks. So, we kind of ran the gamut of psychiatric testing and evaluations, which presented its own challenges at the time, which I can gladly go into because psychiatry needs, a kick in the butt a little bit. But I think for myself, I did what I could and I got through it. Maybe I numbed myself. I can fully admit I've had issues with addiction in the past and sort of processing things and not really wanting to let things in. So you kind of give yourself that almost, drug assisted buffer, if you will. But I mean, folks in this realm, there's definitely a correlation between traumatic experience and drug use and drug abuse.
Sure.
So, that's a reality. But I think a lot of what really got me through it was my own innate stubbornness, I think. The firm belief that I did have that I had a right to exist and to be my authentic self. I just didn't really quite know how to articulate that at the time. And also my community, my friends and the people that I had around me that did see me, and people like Miss John who, validated my existence in a way that I don't even know if she really understood at the time, but it was just sort of that support that I did have in the places that I did have it, if that makes sense.
I'm curious about, was there a time during that period where there must have been a time in that period where you were questioning yourself, questioning whether you were supposed to feel the way you felt.
Very
The
much.
world was looking at you as if there's something wrong with you. You must have questioned. Is that the case?
Yeah, I wasn't really sure about um, how to sort of label all the different things that I was feeling. And the one thing, I mean, I have had my own sort of moments with, is this where I'm meant to be? Like I can totally own and acknowledge that I've had my own run-ins with suicidality and suicidal ideation and those sorts of things. But in terms of, sort of my differences and my uniqueness, I guess, I've never really felt like I needed to play straight. I've always been pretty blunt and open with myself and with the folks around me. To a degree, almost, I think that it became almost a bit of a defense mechanism. It was almost like I'm going to be as queer as I possibly can so that it's in everybody's faces, so that, if they're going to reject me, they're going to reject me for all of me, not just some superficial reason. It was almost as if I wore it as sort of a protective shield, if that
It's
makes sense.
interesting because that is in itself a form of resistance, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
you're challenging the world. You're looking, you're taunting the bullies in a way by being that way.
It was almost as if to say, You're probably going to have a problem with this. So I'm going to be all of me, however I need to be, and own it, and maybe even flaunt it in your face a little bit. Because if you're going to give me crap for it or give me a hard time for it, then I might as well. Like, double down.
So what? How did you move on past that? Like you eventually went back to college. So what? How did you regroup and then start to plot your course?
That's a great question. I actually existed sort of in that in between space. I left high school at 17 and sort of, I did a lot of different work around handling that sort of experience that I had, the bullying that I went through, other experiences that I had in my childhood and, early teen years. Had a lot of therapy. Everybody can benefit from some therapy. Major proponent and advocate for therapy and the benefits of it. But I think the biggest thing, again, was that support network I had in my life. I had a number of different jobs over the years, a lot of like service industry jobs. I've had a lot of really neat jobs actually that have given me random skills. A lot of people call me like a jack of all trades. I can cut hair, I can decorate cake, I can fillet fish. A lot of these things are a result of the different jobs that I've had over the years.
By the way, I absolutely love a person that can decorate a cake and fillet a fish.
Right, it's a good skill.
Yeah, it's a great skill.
Yeah. Makes me like I can make a bird out of an apple, courtesy of working at a Cora's as a breeder for a while. But like all kinds of random things. Great at parties.
You had a whole array of career directions you could have chosen.
Yeah.
Did you choose this one?
A lot of sort of the underpinnings were, my creativity, I guess. I've always appreciated avenues to express myself and be creative and sort of bring joy to people with things that I build with my hands. But anyway, I digress. The sort of that path, it ended up actually leading to a place where, so decorating cake, loved it, had wanted to do it for a very long time. And a couple of months into it as a full-time job, I ended up developing carpal tunnel. So it really impacted my ability to do that as a source of income. So I was basically in this place where I'm in my mid-20s and I can't do the thing that I've always wanted to do that I really love doing. I don't have a high school education. I don't have any post-secondary education. I'm in a place where my physical ability to do frontline service work is being impeded. I was in a dark place when that happened. I went through workers' compensation. I had to do occupational therapy assessments and navigating, I think, like this, even on top of, say, the experience I had in my high school years, was the darkest place I think I'd ever been. It really influenced and affected my sense of independence. I didn't have a partner at the time. I was literally broke. I had lost all my income. I was homeless. I was couch surfing. It was a really dark time. I didn't have a way to provide for myself. And it really kind of highlighted that I needed to do something differently. Actually, at that point, ended up pursuing PTSD related therapy, which kind of helped me deal with the suicidal ideation that was occurring and some of the other darkness that I was, sort of navigating in my life at that time. And I found joy and purpose in volunteering with my local Pride organization. So the social network that I had at the time was very much my like queer community. I had found words for my gender diversity. I had found words for what it was that I was feeling when I was, younger, and I was imagining myself as an older person with a beard and a flat chest and a baseball cap. And it's sort of, in that community, I found the value and the importance of advocacy work. And I had friends at the time who were involved with volunteering with the St. John's Pride organization and sort of organizing the Pride Festival that we have here every year. So I said, I got nothing else on the go. I don't have to work a 9 to 5. I'm trying to find, a source of income through social services or whatever the case may be. I'm trying to navigate these sort of therapeutic relationships I've been trying to develop. And I showed up and I started coordinating the 2015 Pride Festival for St. John's, Newfoundland. So psychologically, I'm running on fumes. I'm, in a really pretty dark place. I've had some things happen. Some relationships have fallen apart. Lost my job, lost my hands. But every week I went to this meeting and I said, okay, the queers need a parade. And that was like my mission. And finding that and throwing myself into it and being able to contribute to that, it gave me a distraction. It gave me a purpose. Um, and in working with the Pride organization, I ended up discovering a love and absolute adoration for being in front of a room, asking people to challenge their own biases about queer and trans people. And here we are. It's like a quick jump.
I just can't imagine what that would have been like. It's interesting that even though we're surrounded by people and even though we may have, an intimate relationship, we're still alone. And I can imagine that, there's just no judging what you have gone through. And frankly, it's not theoretical for you. So what made this, how did you start your business?
Well, so it came from a place of, I was, sort of doing that advocacy work within the community. I found value and like personal value. Like it felt, given all the darkness that I was in and I was experiencing, and, watching a person's light bulb moment or being at the front of a room for, at the time I was doing a lot of work within school. So it was focusing on, sort of doing presentations for school age kids in junior high and high school, and talking about the different realities and the different identities within the broader umbrella term or the broader umbrella acronym, and just watching people's faces sort of light up as they saw this person, this adult, talking about things in a way that they hadn't really seen yet. I know that, the curriculum has shifted over the last decade or so to start including things like this, particularly in like the health class context. But there was just, it was cathartic for tiny baby me, who went through everything I did in high school. It was incredible to watch people's faces just shift and watch their just their ability to see, okay, maybe we can talk about this openly. Maybe what I'm thinking and feeling isn't so random or, unique or isolating. Maybe there can be community around it. So in that moment and finding that joy and finding that sense of purpose within myself, and, having the support network that I did have around me at the time, a friend of mine actually was working with an adult education program out of my local college, and they brought home a form for me. They were like, and they use they pronouns, so I'm just respecting that. They brought home this form and they'd already like half filled it out. And they were like, Teach, you need to look at this program. It was the adult basic education program for adult learners, folks that have been out of, the traditional school system for a number of years, at a place called the Murphy Center. And I can't extol the virtues of the Murphy Center enough. I went back essentially to high school in my late 20s, early 30s, and through their support, through this person's support and this friend of mine's support, because they could see what I was going through. They could see I was adrift and I was a little lost. And they supported me in sort of applying to this program, and with the goal in mind of, well, like, it's a first step. So I followed the momentum and I looked at sort of applying myself to this program. And the instructors I met there were just like, they're coming to my wedding. Like, some of them are being invited to my wedding. Like, the relationships I built with them has just been phenomenal. And it was in that time that I kind of refamiliarized myself, reconnected with my intelligence and my passion and my, like, I'm a pretty intellectual human and I have lots of thoughts and feelings. And, at that point in my life, I was just existing and trying to survive and just get through day to day. So being back in sort of that learning environment and that academic environment really reignited that passion that I had for learning. And while I was in that program for about a year and a half, the folks there, the administration, the instructors, they were so supportive. And they're like, Tej, you need to use this brain that you have. You're passionate. You're so committed to your work, your communities, the advocacy that you do. It's all volunteer based. It wasn't, it wasn't paying the bills or buying groceries. And in that time, in that program, I was told that because I was in this program, I was eligible for support through post-secondary, through employment insurance, through EI, essentially. So I had my feelings about taking advantage of the system. Maybe other people need it more than me, but then I had other people challenging that as like, look at the path you've lived. You're doing, free community advocacy work. this is why people pay taxes. Take advantage of it. So I actually applied for post-secondary, applied to College in the North Atlantic here. And I thought, what if I could take this passion for advocacy and this, I'd had a lot of positive feedback up until that point, my ability to create that learning space for folks. People felt safe, and asking questions with me and my approach to things. So I thought, what if I could turn it into a business? And originally I thought the idea would be to do marketing, to focus on how to market inclusion, essentially, to learn the language of marketing, so that I could speak to businesses in a way that they understood and encourage them to look at, what can we do to make people feel more safe and being themselves in their workplaces. And so I applied for marketing. I got accepted into the college program, started a few months after leaving the ABE program at the Murphy Center. And in the first year, it was kind of that general, you do a little bit of everything. You kind of touch base with all the functions. So we had marketing courses, HR courses, and accounting courses. And it turned out that marketing was, I don't know if I should say this to you, but marketing was actually my least favorite of the three. I really fell in love with HR and also really fell in love with accounting because I thought accounting was appealing because it was a puzzle where there was
You like accounting more than marketing? Oh,
I know. Yeah, it's I liked that there were given answers. With accounting, it was A plus B equals C, and there was it was right or wrong, and there was no room. But
right.
HR spoke to me, and after having sort of all of the employment experience that I've had over the years, it was instinctual almost. I don't want to risk a toot in my own horn. I got it in a way that just, I was in my classes and I'm challenging my instructors. I'm like, okay, so yes, but what about equity? What about diversity and inclusion? Where are the practices that are focused on challenging the status quo about how HR has been done for the last however many years? Why are we perpetuating these sort of insular approaches to how we build workforces? Why are we still centering white straight men in everything that we do? How can we challenge that? How can we break the glass ceiling for women in work and in business? So it sort of tapped this passion that I had for inclusion work and diversity work, and it gave me a different way to look at it. So, needless to say, I applied for HR as my mainstream, and throughout the course of it, with the instructors' help and support of my instructors, my T&D, my training and development instructor, he knew about all the things I was doing outside, because as I'm navigating college, I'm also co-founding an organization that's specifically focused on supporting trans folks here in the province, and doing all of this community advocacy, doing all of these trainings for service providers. And he let me sort of tie it all together. So a lot of my college assignments and, deliverables for my diploma, my instructors were basically supporting me and using that as an avenue to continue the advocacy I was doing. I was just doing it in the academic context. So I could do research assignments or projects and then take that and bring it back to my community work. So it was a really cool dovetailing.
So you launched your business how long ago?
January of last year. COVID business, yeah.
Right in the middle of COVID. Fantastic. Yeah. So what are the services you provide businesses? How does it work?
Yeah. The goal is really to sort of offer three pillars essentially. And within that, obviously they're sort of caterable and we can tweak them, whatever organizations need. But the focus actually of what I'm doing right now is training. So a lot of people just kind of want that entry level queer and trans 101. A lot of people want to talk about what the acronym means, want to talk about appropriate language in the workspace, want to talk about pronoun use and how we can implement that for gender diverse folks. So a lot of it, I guess the three pillars would be sort of the education side, the consulting side, which is, let's look at your current practices and let's do sort of an assessment of where you are right now, where your starting point is. Let's collaborate on how to define goals and, to get you to where you actually should be, particularly around, legislation that's in place right now for folks, looking at compliance with that legislation, looking at doing an assessment even from the employee standpoint and seeing, what are folks experiencing? Maybe you have anti-harassment policies on the books, but are people still, maybe experiencing harassment because people are getting more creative? Prejudice finds a way. If folks are invested in, sharing those views or having their opinions about people and challenging them, prejudice finds a way to be expressed. And then the third sort of pillar, I guess, along with the education and consulting piece, is just public engagement. It's, I've done a lot of sort of speaking engagements at conferences, one-offs, that kind of thing. Some of it can be sort of a combination of that educational piece, but then also sharing my personal narrative to kind of contextualize it for folks and humanize the experience. So those are the three, main focuses, I guess, in terms of services.
And so how much resistance is there, or how much resistance do you encounter when speaking to businesses? And how much resistance is there within businesses amongst the employee population to your community?
I think in the last little while, what I've seen is a shift in, it's almost twofold, and bear with me as I try to figure out how to articulate this delicately. A lot of folks sometimes get caught up in the ticking of the boxes. I think people are recognizing the social moment that we're in. I think people are recognizing that, particularly younger folks and, Generation Z and even millennials to a degree, there's a lot less inclination to just sort of take what's happening. People are upset with the status quo and people want to challenge that. So in terms of the reaction from business as an industry, and then the folks that are sort of in positions of power, you're looking at sometimes generational gaps because you have, upper management is of a different time. And then you have middle management, Gen X and millennials, who are just like, okay, yeah, we can see that things are changing and that maybe it hasn't been great and how things are done. And then you've got the frontline work staff, like workforce, and they're just not taking it. They're, people, I'm just amazed. I've had a lot of opportunity to work with youth, and young folks are just like, F this, we want to change everything. Things need to shift. How it's been done is just not working. So I think that management and business as an industry finds itself in this interesting position of, they're being squeezed in different ways from different directions. Society is saying, okay, yes, we're in this moment. Things need to shift. Inclusion and diversity and equity and justice need to be part of the conversation. But their systems don't quite know how to actually support that yet. And I think that, some of the resistance or some of the reactions that I've seen is people are like, well, I know we need to do this. We just don't know how. So if we hire some consultant to come talk to us for 2 hours about what it is to be gender diverse, then maybe we can take the box and we can appease some people and say it and report it in something and say, to the stakeholders or whomever. It's like, yeah, okay, we did the work. But a lot of folks aren't really aware of how deep this stuff goes. It's not just the 101.
There's a difference as well between having to and wanting to.
Yes.
So again, I know that you're only speaking from your own perspective.
For sure.
But how many businesses that you encounter really want to?
Well, I find actually there's sometimes a correlation between personal experience and industry. I know that, but again, depending on the industry that folks are in, there's a reason why people are pulled to particular industries because of their own constitution, their own backgrounds, their own goals and morals and sense of importance and value and all of those sorts of pieces. But a lot of the time, the folks that I interact with or that I encounter that are genuinely driven and genuinely want to improve the experiences of their 2S LGBTQIA plus workers are people who have folks in their lives with that lived experience. Because it's humanized. It's a bit more personally connected. It's a bit more personally relevant. They've seen what people go through when these things and these inclusion factors and efforts aren't in place.
I guess my next to last question is this. What's the kind of the key piece of advice that you would give to a company as to why they should do this and how they should do this?
Okay. The why is simple and complicated at the same time. The why is it's the right thing to do. It's the legally right thing to do, but it's also a really powerful way to challenge some of those things that I mentioned, some of those experiences that I've had. Now, I mean, I do admit it's my own experience. I can't speak for everyone else. Things have shifted. You know, the things that I encountered may not be what people encounter now in their coming out journey. But we still have, as recently as 2018, you know, the stats from a study that Stats Canada conducted in 2018, that was released in 2020. We have 69% of people who identify as trans and gender diverse experiencing inappropriate behavior in the workplace. And that's years
Wow.
after the legislation has been brought to the fore. It's years after the Canadian government has helped establish precedent around this. It's, you know, these things are still happening for people at work. Maybe it doesn't look the same as what mine is or what my experiences have been, but people are still feeling like they can't be who they are at work. They can't bring their sense of self, their ideas, their community. You know, we talk about trying to challenge the way that business and industry has been stuck, and how, you know, this sort of EDI and justice sort of conversation has come to the fore and is, you know, a lot more present right now. And the way that we do that is we allow people with unique and individual and different from the dominant culture and status quo's perspective share their ideas. And people can't do that if they don't feel physically and psychologically safe. So sort of challenging our systems and challenging how things have been done and digging into why things have been done that way and the biases and the challenges and the restrictions and the constraints that those systems perpetuate can really give us the ability to be all of those things and to be all of who we are at work. And, you know, if we give the folks that have these ideas, the younger folks that are challenging these systems, the power and the support to do those things, then like they can help us change it. Give it a generation, and some of these power structures and power dynamics are going to look completely different. You know, so follow the lead of people with the lived experience and follow the lead of the people who know what those restrictions and constraints feel like. That's a big answer.
That is a great answer. So how do they do it? How should they do it?
That's a tricky one. And I mean, like, I think I'm new to the EDI industry, and, you know, I've done my research as much as I can, and it's limited in my own knowledge and perception of that knowledge and, you know, the experience and expertise that's out there. But you have to start asking the questions, I guess. You know, look at the power structures, look at the dynamics within a workplace that maintain that status quo, because it's not just about queer and trans inclusion. It's about challenging the centering of what society has deemed the dominant culture, and that even in this day and age is still white, cis, straight men. And it's about looking at, you know, how can we upset that? How can we break down the barriers and the, you know, unspoken rules and expectations around conduct that support that structure and perpetuate that structure. So, you know, it's about investigating our discomfort with change. It's about investigating why it's safer and it feels easier to just leave things as they are. I mean, you know, you could go into a whole conversation. We could go into a whole conversation about capitalism and some of the challenges and restrictions of capitalism and consumerism. But, you know, how folks go about it is investigate why things are the way that they are, who those systems and how, you know, what the restrictions and who they affect, and look at how can we dismantle some of those barriers and how can we make people feel safer and more able to actually bring their thoughts to any kind of table, any kind of conversation. You know, so that's a lot of theoretical stuff, but I think, you know, a more tangible sort of example would be connect with people in your community. If you have folks within your workplace or within your environment or within your social circle or within your local community doing advocacy for any kind of marginalized or underrepresented group or historically excluded group, invite them for a coffee and have a conversation, but spend more time in that conversation listening than speaking, or spend more time inviting and encouraging that person to share their thoughts and their ideas than defending yourself or defending your, you know, where you're coming from. It's really just a kind of, I think the best way to go about it is to let people in.
So TJ, my last question to you is this. There is so much tension in the world right now, and across so many dimensions. On one hand, we're seeing immense progress. On the other hand, we see resistance to that progress, and there's certain communities that would see us go backwards. It strikes me that, oftentimes the people that are trying to pull us backwards aren't the majority. And so, and this is my own interpretation of it, we're seeing corporations actually now taking a leadership position on this stuff because they recognize that their key audiences as a majority don't necessarily support these regressive measures. So I'm curious to you, you work in this every single day. You're a member of the community and you work with companies that are trying to get it right. So what's your impression as to what the future looks like, particularly in the near term?
Oh, that's a big question. I think, as you mentioned, the more progress we make, it's almost like the louder the progress gets, the further we move forward with this conversation, the louder the detractors and the regression sort of piece comes into place. I think when we're looking at sort of how the world is going to adapt and adopt these sorts of more inclusive measures, particularly for the 2S LGBTQI plus community, I think we're trying to reset. When I do training, a lot of the time people ask me, especially around gender diversity, it's, do you want gender diversity or do you want gender to just not exist anymore? Do we want to not have that? I think a big part of how we can get this conversation to meaningfully stick is to somehow get to a place where we can recognize there's an importance to acknowledging the uniqueness of everyone, but having space for that uniqueness to flourish. And I know that sounds kind of like an intangible idea, but I think for me, at least, what I would like to see is room for folks to do things like share their pronouns and have the reaction in the room not be, oh, this again, or, this doesn't apply to me, or, why do we always have to have this conversation? Why does this always have to be brought up? There needs to be room for all of these things to exist. And I think that the more we have these conversations, the more we engage in this knowledge, like the learning around, what it is that folks within different communities, different from us, what they experience. I think we just need to have that more human-centered approach. I'm not really sure. I wish I could see the future, and I wish that I could understand or visualize how exactly that would play out, particularly in like a corporate context. But I think how we get there is folks in leadership, like you said, corporations, folks that have that sort of larger voice in the grand scheme or the stage of the world, if you will, or societal stage. They need to get behind it. They need to reinforce it, and they need to carve out that space within their own practice and their own culture. And I think how we do that is, a lot of the time I have this conversation, like, how do we get there? What happens first, cart before the horse, all of these sorts of euphemisms that talk about, what do we do to create this space? And I think leadership just really needs to embody what it is to carve out space for everyone to be all of who they are. And I think a lot of that comes through HR policy, culture management pieces around what it is that we talk about, what's appropriate to talk about, what language is appropriate to use at work. And I think eventually I'm just kind of hoping that we'll hit this critical mass point where, folks are familiar enough with this conversation that it kind of becomes ingrained. And, we walk into space and we anticipate it, as opposed to, that, like I just mentioned, oh, this again. I don't know if that makes sense. Robert, that's a bit of a rambly answer, but yeah.
I think, no, you know what, I suppose, to put a fine point on what you're saying, are you optimistic?
I am. I think I kind of have to be, as bittersweet as that might sound. I think there is a lot of interest, particularly around the younger generations, folks that are of a younger age right now. They don't take the absence of inclusion. There's sort of that, I think the baseline has been extended or moved or shifted where, folks are engaging in a way that allows for more authenticity. And if they don't see it, they don't stand for it. They don't stay, especially in the world of work. If the culture isn't there and folks aren't being supported in a way that feels meaningful, then, we're in the middle of a great resignation for many different reasons. But I think, sort of the DEI, EDI approach to things and wanting room for everybody to be their authentic selves and the work-life balance, like, folks they're not willing to put up with things in a similar way. So I think that, right?
Yeah, I see that. I see that for sure. It's really interesting. I walked by my 16-year-old daughter's room last night, and there she was taping up the rainbow flag on her window facing the street. And I just thought, you know what, like, we've always been really clear with her. She is loved unconditionally. It doesn't really matter to us what she chooses to pursue in life. And I just thought, there's a girl that doesn't see color the way previous generations has done, doesn't see sexual orientation the way previous generations has done. And I feel optimistic if I just witness my own experience working with young, university students. So, TJ, I know that you've gone through an immense amount in your life, and the fact that you've chosen to use all of that lived experience and turn it into a business, to me, makes you a perfect example of what we're trying to focus here on the Creators. So I want to thank you so much for the time that you've taken to share your story with us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. It's very much I'm grateful for the opportunity to share and to talk about this. So thank you so much.
Thanks. Thanks so much for sticking to the end of our interview with TJ Jones, founder of Full Picture Management. TJ's story is one of curiosity, despair, and enlightenment that eventually led to the development of a business that aims to help move companies towards greater empathy, inclusion, and kindness. If you like this interview, please remember to hit like and subscribe to discover more amazing stories about entrepreneurs. Thanks, and see you next time.